Hear that, bruv? Let's go to the other video then. This one isn't available. This is the first edition of Clarice Lispector's. Let's see what we got here. Let's see what we can do. You. Let's see. Are we starting? This ain't what I want, bruv. I want to go to fucking live. Let's get to live. View channel. There we go, bruv. Now let me turn this on. Oh, it's already down, isn't it? The Apple in the Dark by Clarice Lispector. Translated from the Portuguese with an introduction by Gregory Rabassa, 1967. Alfred A. Knapp, New York. By creating all things, he entered into everything. By entering into all things, he became what has form and what is formless. He became what can be defined and what cannot be defined. He became what has support and what has no support. He became what is crude and what is delicate. He became every kind of thing. That is why wise men called him the real one, the Vedas, the Upanishads. How a man is made. Clarice Lispector was born in Chekelnik, Ukraine, Ukraine in 1924. A purely incidental fact in her life, as her parents, already en route to embark for Brazil at the time, had merely paused in their journey long enough for their second daughter to be born. The family settled in Recife, and Clarice attended school there until the age of 12 when the family moved to Rio de Janeiro. Clarice completed her secondary schooling in the capital and entered the faculty of law at the university there, from which she was graduated in 1944. In 1943, she had married Maury Gurgel Valente, a fellow student who entered the Foreign Service of Brazil upon graduation. Her husband was posted to Naples in 1944, and Clarice spent many of the following years outside Brazil, 8 of them in the United States. She did most of her writing abroad, and her 2 sons were born overseas. In 1959, she returned to Brazil, and she has lived in Rio de Janeiro ever since. She had begun writing while she was still in school and while doing editorial work to help support herself. She struck up a friendship with the novelist Lucio Cardoso, who encouraged her and read her works. He was responsible for the title of her first novel, Perto do Coraco Salvajum, Close to the Savage Heart. think it was near to the Wild Heart, actually, a name he had drawn from Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a young man. This novel, published in 1943, was both a critical and a financial success. Spelled success wrong, a success. It was followed by two more novels, O Lustre, The Chandelier, in 1946, and A Cidade, I'm not Portuguese, The Besieged City, in 1949. During these years, he had also written several short stories, many of which appeared in the magazine Senhor, and came out in, or is that Senor, and came out in book form as Alguns Cantos, some stories, in 1952, and Lacos de Familia, Family Ties, in 1959. This latter collection contains her best-known story, O Professor de Mathematica, which has appeared in English in Odyssey Review as The Crime of the Mathematics Professor. I'm going to skip that and get right to chapter 1. The Apple in the Dark by Clarice Lispector. Translated from the Portuguese, with an introduction by Gregory Rabassa. Chapter 1. This tale begins in March on a night as dark as night can get, when a person is asleep. The peaceful way in which time was passing could be seen in the high passage of the moon across the sky, then later on much deeper into night. The moon, too, disappeared. There was nothing now to distinguish Martim's sleep from the slow and moonless garden. When a man slept so deeply, he came to be the same as that tree standing over there, or the top of a toad in the darkness. Some of the trees there had grown with rooted leisure until they reached the top of their crowns and the limit of their destiny. Others had burst out of the earth in quick tufts. The flower beds had an order about them that was concentrating in a great struggle to achieve some kind of symmetry. Although this order was discernible from up on the balcony of the large hotel, a person standing at the level of the flower beds could not make it out. The driveway, detailed in small cut stones, lay between the flower beds. Off in one turn of the drive, the Ford had been parked for so long a time that it was already part of the great interwoven garden and its silence. By day, however, the countryside was different, and the crickets, vibrating hollow and hard, left the entire expanse open, shadowless. All the while, there was that dry smell of crumbling stone that daytime has in the country. Yet on that very day, Tim, I keep saying Martin, but it's Martim, had been standing on the balcony, uselessly obedient, so as not to miss anything that was going on. But not very much was going on. Before one's eyes reached the beginning of the road, which disappeared into the dust, suspended in the sunlight, there was only the garden to be contemplated, comprehensible and symmetrical from up on the balcony, tangled and confused when one became part of it, and the man had been playing for 2 weeks now with what he could remember of it, carefully nurturing it, saving it for eventual use. Huh? What do you mean, huh? This is power, buddy. For any other kind of attention, however, the day was untouchable, like a point designed upon the point itself. The voice of the cricket was the very body of the cricket, and it told nothing. The only advantage of daytime was that in the bright light, the car was becoming a little beetle that could easily get to the highway. What power? What do you mean, what power? The power of the man, brubs. power are you talking about? But while the man was sleeping, the car was becoming enormous in the way that an idle machine is gigantic. And at night, the garden was filled with the secret weaving that darkness lives on. Work whose existence is suddenly made clear by fireflies. A certain dampness also betrayed the secret of the work. What are you confused about? I'm reading the book. I mean, does this seem like a foreign concept, a book? A book, a person, and words coming from that person as he deciphers the book. What do you got, bruv? Never mind? Yeah, it's fucking complicated. It's a book, and I'm going through the words and deciphering them. I know it's a fucking foreign concept, bruv, but let's stick to this. A certain dampness also betrayed the secret of the work, and night was an element in which life, by becoming strange, became recognizable. All right, we both got this clear that it's a book, so why are you confused? About power? What's the confusing part here? My thumb? What are you confused about, bruv? A certain dampness also betrayed the secret of the work, and night was an element in which life, by becoming strange, became recognizable. All right, we're on the same fucking page then. It was on that night that the motor of the car vibrated and reached out to the empty and sleeping hotel. The darkness slowly began to move. Instead of waking up and listening directly, Martim, and that's Martin with an M, so it's Martim, I guess, passed over to the other side of darkness through an even deeper sleep. And there he heard the sound the wheels made as they spat up the dry sand. Then his name was spoken, clearly and cleanly, in some way pleasant to hear. It was the German who had spoken. In his sleep, Martim enjoyed the sound of his own name, and then the violent cry of a bird whose wings had been frightened into immobility. The way freight can seem to be joy, or fright, not freight. I guess freight could be joy too. But it became silent within the silence again. Martim was sleeping even farther away, and yet in the depths of his sleep something had echoed with difficulty, trying to organize itself until the sound of the car in all of its finest details was repeated in his memory. Without any sense and free from the inconvenience of having to be understood. The idea of the car alerted a soft warning that he did not immediately understand, but now a vague alarm had spread out into the world, and its center of radiation was the man himself. So me then, his body thought, touched with pity. He remained lying down, remotely enjoying it. The man had arrived at the hotel 2 weeks before, finding it in the middle of the night with almost no surprise. Exhaustion makes everything like that possible. It was an empty hotel with only the German and the servant. If he was a servant. And for 2 weeks, while Martim was getting his strength back in almost uninterrupted sleep, the car had remained parked in one of the driveways, its wheels buried in the sand, so motionless, so resistant to the man's habit of incredulity and his care not to let himself be deceived, that Martim had finally ended up feeling that it was at his disposal. But the truth is that even on that night when he had staggered in, when he had at last let himself drop half dead onto a real bed with real sheets, even then the car had represented the security of new flight, in case the two men should seem to be too curious about the identity of the guest, and he had fallen asleep confidently, as if nobody would ever be able to wrest from his firm grasp the imaginary rim of a steering wheel as he clutched the sheet in his hands. The German, however, had not asked him anything, and the servant, if that was what he was, had scarcely glanced at him. Their reluctance to take him in had not come from any distrust, but from the fact that the hotel had not been a hotel for some time. Why is it talking about something German? That's just the way the book's going, buddy. It's written by a Ukrainian turned Brazilian who is writing the story. I believe this is her last novel, and this is the first edition, so it's worth some money. This woman is all the rage on whatever this fucking place is called, YouTube, BookTube. So that's why it's talking about a German. And so as not to cause suspicion, let's get back to the German. The German, however, had not asked him anything, and the servant, if that was what he was, had scarcely glanced at him. Their reluctance to take him in had not come from any distrust, but from the fact that the hotel had not been a hotel for some time. It's not a German book. It's a Russian book, or a Ukrainian, Brazilian, so it were, ever since it had been fruitlessly put up for sale. The German had explained to him, and so as not to cause suspicion, Martim had nodded his head, smiling. Before the new highway had been built, cars had passed by there, and the isolated big house could not have been better situated as an obligatory stopping place for the night. When the new highway had been put through 30 miles away, it detoured all the cars that used to pass, and the whole town had died, so there was no reason anymore for anyone to have use for a hotel in a place that had been turned over to the winds. But in spite of the apparent indifference of the two men, Martim's obstinate quest for security became tied to that car, over which the spiders too had executed their perfect aerial work, which had been tranquilized by all of its varnished immobility. So let me get this straight. It's a Russian book, but it's talking about something German. Here's the deal, bruv. I told you. I will tell you again, bruv. 3 things. Clarice Lispector was born in Ukraine, but she grew up in, I believe, Brazil. So I believe she wrote this in Portuguese. Yeah, translated from the Portuguese with an introduction by Gregory Rabassa, 1967. She was originally Ukrainian. I guess she was Ukrainian her whole life, but she moved to Brazil with her family. That was the car that had been uprooted itself with a horse sound, in the middle of the night. Why am I not on here now? In the silence, which was once more intact, the man now stared stupidly at the invisible ceiling, which in the darkness was as high as the sky. Where were we, bruv? Stretched out on his back upon the bed, he had tried with an effort of gratuitous pleasure to reconstruct the sound of the wheels, for he did not feel pain, but pleasure in a general way. He could not see the garden from his bed. A little mist was coming in through the open Venetian blinds, and the man could tell that it was there from the smell of damp cotton and from a certain physical yearning for happiness that fog induces. But you're talking about Russia and Ukraine and Brazil, but you're not talking about Germany, and it talks about German stuff. Let's follow the story, bruv. In the silence, which was once more intact, the man now stared stupidly at the invisible ceiling, which in the darkness was as high as the sky. Stretched out on his back upon the bed, he tried with an effort of gratuitous pleasure to reconstruct the sound of the wheels, for he did not feel pain but pleasure in a general way. He could not see the garden from his bed. A little mist was coming in through the open Venetian blinds, and the man could tell that it was there from the smell of damp cotton and from a certain physical yearning for happiness. That fog induces. It had only been a dream then. Skeptical, however, he got up. In the darkness, he could see nothing from the balcony, and he could not even guess the symmetry of the flower beds. A few splotches darker than the darkness itself showed the probable location of the trees. The garden remained at nothing but an effort of memory, and the man stared quietly, sleepily. Here and there, a firefly made the darkness even vaster. Having forgotten about the dream that had drawn him out onto the balcony, the man's body found that it was a pleasant feeling to sense itself in a healthy, upright position. The air was in suspension, and the dark position of the leaves was little changed. He let himself stand there, then docile, bewildered with the succession of unoccupied rooms behind him. Those empty rooms multiplied themselves until they disappeared off to where the man could no longer see anything more. Martim sighed inside his long waking sleep. Without too much insistence, he tried to grasp the notion of the rooms farthest away, as if he himself had grown too large and had spread out too much. And for some reason that he had already forgotten, for some obscure reason, it had become essential to retreat so that he could think or perhaps feel. But he could not get himself to do it. And it was very pleasant. So he stayed there with the courteous air of a man who has been hit over the head, until just as when a clock stops ticking and only thus makes us aware that it had been ticking before, Martim perceived the silence and his own presence within the silence. Then, by means of a very familiar lack of comprehension, the man at last began to be himself in an indistinct sort of way. Then things began to get reorganized. Beginning with him, the darkness was beginning to be understood. Branches were slowly taking shape under the balcony, shadows dividing up into flowers, undefined as yet, with their edges hidden by the quiet lushness of the plants. The flower beds were outlined, full and soft. The man grunted approvingly. With some difficulty, he had just recognized the garden, which at intervals during those 2 weeks of sleep had constituted his irreducible vision. It was at that moment that a faint moon passed out of a cloud in great silence, silently spread itself over the calm stones, and silently disappeared into the darkness. The moonlit face of the man turned then toward the drive where the Ford ought to be standing motionless. But the car had disappeared. The man's entire body suddenly woke up. With a sharp glance, his eyes covered the whole darkness of the garden, and without a sign of warning, he wheeled around toward his room with the soft leap of a monkey. Nothing was moving, however, in the cavity of the room, which had become enormous in the darkness. The man stood breathing heavily, alert and uselessly fierce, with his hands held in front of him against the tack. But the silence of the hotel was the same as that of night, and without visible limits, the room prolonged the darkness of the garden with the same exhalation. To wake himself up, the man rubbed his eyes several times with the back of one hand, while keeping the other one free for defense. His new sensibility was of no use. In the darkness, his wide-open eyes could not even see the walls. It was as if he had been set down alone in the middle of of a field. Did it say of a? Of a field, and as if he had finally remembered a long dream in which a hotel, now broken up in pieces on the empty ground, had figured a car imagined only through desire, and above all, as if the reason for a man to be all expectant in a place was also a form of expectancy. You love the Soviet Union? Well, that's good. All that he had left of reality was the wisdom that had made him take a leap in vague defense. The instinct was now leading him to calculate with unexpected lucidity that if the German had gone to turn him in, it would take some time for him to get there and return with the police. Why do you love the Soviet Union so much? Why? Give me an answer. Which still left him free temporarily unless the servant had been assigned to watch him. And in that case, the servant, if that is what he was, would at this very moment be outside the door of that very room with his ear alert to the slightest movement on the part of the guest. That is what he was thinking, and when he stopped the reasoning which he had reached with the malleability of an invertebrate, with the malleability an invertebrate uses to become smaller in order to slip away, Martin plunged into the same previous absence of reason and the same obtuse impartiality, as if nothing had anything to do with him, and as if the species would take care of him. Without looking back, guided by a slippery adroitness of movement, he began to climb down the balcony by placing his unexpectedly flexible feet on the outcroppings of the bricks. In his attentive remoteness, the man could smell, as if he would never forget it, the malevolent odor of the broken ivy near his face. You love it because of the hammer and sickle, eh? Now only his spirit was alert, and it could not distinguish between what was and what was not important. And he gave the same scrupulous consideration to every operation. Do you have a hammer and sickle tattoo on your back? With a soft jump that made the garden gasp as it held its breath, he found himself right in the middle of a flower bed, which ruffled up and then closed down. With his body alert, the man waited for the message of his jump to be transmitted from secret echo to secret echo until it would be transformed into distant silence. His thud would end by breaking on the side of some mountain. No one had taught the man to have that intimacy with things that happen at night, but a body knows. He waited a while longer until nothing was happening. Only then did he carefully feel for the glasses in his pocket. They were intact. He sighed carefully and finally looked around. The night was delicately vast and dark. You're 12? Right. Is that what everybody who goes on YouTube Live is 12 years old? Are you really 12? That's embarrassing. CBGB. Chapter 2. The man had walked for miles. Let me see if I can change this. Edit video. Wonder if you can edit it while you're while it's going on. Probably not. Can we edit this while it's going on? I don't think so. Maybe we can. Clarice. reading from Clarice Lispector's The Apple in the Dark. Save. All right, let's go back to the... Can we go back to the fucking live? Can we be live again? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. Reading. Yeah, we are. What the fuck? I don't understand, bruv. Is it over? This is the live control room. Connected. Holy shit, now we can. How do you think it's embarrassing to be almost 13 years old? It's not embarrassing to be 13 years old. It's embarrassing that my whole audience is a tween. Oh, and by the way, I have over 1,200 subscribers on YouTube. Good job, buddy. How do I get this to expand? No, you're offline. Am I? Oh, that sucks. All right, I can't read that anymore. Chapter 2.